as we look at kind of getting into the heart of the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher starts at a very common point, a common quest that I think a lot of us can resonate with. Basically, what he's looking for here in this chapter and a half is he's looking for a good life, right? He's looking to find joy in life. And a lot of us, I mean, we will go to great lengths to find joy in life. We would go to great lengths to have a good life. That's why we live in the house that we live. That's why we have the job that we work at. That's why we have the car that we drive. I mean, that's even why, like, I wear certain shirts over other shirts because it's more comfortable. And I want to enjoy, like, I think Gus is like, I don't like that shirt because it's itchy. You know, I'm like, I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want a life that's joyous. And even last night, I'm home alone. Michelle's with the kids in Houston. And I'm like, man, I can cook whatever I want. Yeah, I'm going to H-E-B and I'm buying a steak because I want to enjoy life. I want to enjoy these things. And I think we'll go to great lengths to find joy, even in the small things. And even, I was talking with Life yesterday, like even in hardships, especially as Christians, we're always like, okay, what's God do? Like, what's his end here? And we're trying to find out purpose. We're trying to find joy. We're like, okay, this is going to pay off one day. And so I'll just endure this and I'll carry it on. And I think as we just ask this big question, where do we find joy in life? I mean, we can look in many things. We can look to pleasure. We can look to laughter. We can look to wine. We can look to sex. We can look to material things. We could look to wisdom. We could even look to madness and folly. We could on and on and on, even our achievements. And I think what Solomon does here, I mean, last week we kind of saw the introduction to Ecclesiastes, but here he's kind of just like, let me show you from my life that this is not a thought experiment. I mean, this is a man who had everything, as we'll see later in this text. He had everything. And so he says, well, let's turn to my personal experience. And so he picks up in verse 12, and this is where he goes from this introductory kind of thought experiment to now he's almost creating a research question, right? What's the good life? Where do I find the good life? Where is joy to be found? And he goes from that and he steps into the lab and he starts testing things out. So we see is in verse 13 and 14, he says, I'm going to search for meaning because it seems like an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man, or literally translated, the children of Adam, to be busy with. I've seen everything under the sun. And when he says in verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, what's lacking cannot be counted, what he's saying is there's some things in life that are crooked that no matter how hard we try, we can't bend them back into shape. I mean, even if you try to take, a pipe cleaner, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a pipe cleaner, you bend it and then you try to straighten it out, you can't do that. And then it's like wonky, it's like, ooh, like we can't bend it perfectly back straight as it was designed to be. And he's like, look, in verse 16, he's like, I had it all. I acquired great wisdom. I surpassed all those over Jerusalem before me. My heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. I mean, this is the guy who, when he became king, God said, I'll give you whatever you want. And he said, I want wisdom. He said, great, I'll give you wisdom. And I'll give you a great kingdom. And so he had it all. And he even wanted to know in verse 17, he says, I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, which is like I wanted to know what was good and right and moral, and I wanted to know the crazy things. Or if you want to use the language of Genesis 1 and 2, I wanted to have the knowledge of good and evil. And what did he find at the end of verse 17 into verse 18? He found vanity. He found what we talked about last week, hevel. It's this mist, this vapor, this meaninglessness. It's a striving after the wind. And then he says, for in much wisdom, there's much vexation. There's a lot more problems that come with the more you know. I mean, we look at our little kids and we're like, I remember one time my son goes, oh, Dad, today was hard. I was like, what'd you do? He's like, played. I'm like, okay. He's like, it was hard to play. I had a whole empire to build in my sandbox. And I'm like, wait till you get a mortgage, dude. But like he doesn't know certain things, and so his problems are very small because his knowledge is small. And the more and more and more you know, I mean, even as a pastor, like the more I find out about things, the more sorrow and stress and sad. I mean, it says if you increase in knowledge, you're increasing in sorrow, because we're living in this broken world and we're like, what do we do with this? So I think what Solomon's kind of starting with his thesis here before he steps into the lab is he says, joy can't be found under heaven. Joy can't be found under the sun. And if you try to look for it, it's a hopeless search. It's like trying to strive after the wind. I mean, I'll let you later just think about the mental image of somebody in your backyard trying to run around and catch the wind. It's hopeless. So then in chapter 2, he gets into this quest, right? So first, in verse 1 to 11, he tries out pleasure. He tries to feel something. He tries to feel something. He realizes, I have this hole in my heart. I think it's in chapter 3 or 4 where he says, God's put eternity in man's heart. So he's like, there's some longing here. There's some hole here. And I'm going to try to just enjoy myself. Or what we might call hedonism. Hedonism. It's just like, do what makes you feel right. And at the end of verse 1, he said, but behold, this also was vanity. This also is vanity. So right at the gate, he says, joy, not just, it's not found under the sun, but he's like, joy is not found in what we feel. Joy is not found in what we feel. And you think, like, this is a very logical place to start with hedonism. You know, because if you think the premise of hedonism is, what makes you happy? We'll do that. Well, if we do what makes us happy, then we might find joy or a good life. And I think a lot of times we think, man, if I only had blank, then I'd be happy. Remember thinking in college, if I only had this wife, then I'd be happy. You get married and you're sleeping on the floor in some apartment, not making enough. And you're like, man, if I only had a job that paid more, if I only had that house. And then you get into the house and then you're like, no, but we need an extra bedroom. You get that house. And then it's like, well, I don't like the fans. I don't like the paint. I don't like the floors. If I only had this, I'd be happy. And what we do then is we say, well, then that thing is ultimate because our happiness or our joy or our goodness of life is contingent on that thing. And we all know, like, once you get that thing, your life's not that much better. You just want the next thing. Or maybe you don't go, okay, I'm not searching after those things, but I'll use them as like an escape. I'll use them as something to distract me from life's meaninglessness because I've realized, well, these things won't actually satisfy me, but maybe they can at least numb the pain. And what we see here in these 11 verses is that the way one author puts it is, within the house of hedonism, there are many rooms, and Solomon tried to sleep in them all. I mean, look at what he goes through. He starts with laughter. I said of laughter, it's mad. And of pleasure, what use is it? I mean, this is something like me and my wife struggle. Like after a long day, she's just like, hey, I just want to put on a show that will make me laugh. Right? And I'm like, yes, let's just stop thinking about the problems and let's just do that. I think the late Robin Williams famously said, I think the saddest people are always trying the hardest to make people laugh because they know what it's like to feel absolutely worthless. And they don't want anyone else to feel that. And we know, many of us know, the tragic end that he had in his life. But I mean, that's like, I love comedy. I love comedians. And a lot of times they're like, you need more trauma to be funny. Because that's a normal way that we cope with things, is we just turn awkward situations into cracking a joke. And he says here, instead of laughter, it's mad. And of pleasure, what use is it? So he goes, all right, well, the comedy club didn't work. Let me go down to the bar. Let me go down to the bar. He says, I searched in my heart how to cheer my body with wine. Now that phrase, my heart is still guiding me with wisdom, says, okay, well, is he just, walking in as like a wino and a very nice connoisseur? Well, then the next phrase says, and how to lay hold on folly So you're like, okay, well, maybe he did, someone was like, is this like Piano Man where it's just a guy drinking at the bar alone? Or is it like Margaritaville where he's just wasted away again looking for his shaker of salt? And I'm like, honestly, he probably both. He probably tried it all, whether he was trying to approach alcohol in a sophisticated way or in an inebriated way. And I think what we'll see later in Ecclesiastes 2 and 3 is like wine can be a good or bad thing. I mean, God gave it to us to enjoy his goodness, but when we see that as like, well, that's going to be the thing. I mean, that makes me feel great. It gives me confidence when I'm in social settings. Oh, I don't want to have to go to this thing. Well, let me just have a drink before I go talk to people. That's searching for meaning or for satisfaction. When we say we need a substance, when we say, oh, after a long day, man, I deserve this. Or I'm going to escape from this. I mean, Psalmist says, look, I tried it all, and drinking doesn't take the pain away. So then he goes, all right, well, let me try to do something constructive. So in verse 4 to 6, he's trying out architecture, he's trying great foods, he's trying agriculture, he's trying engineering. I mean, you can read 2 Chronicles and see all that he built. I mean, he built houses. And he even built the temple, and then he built his own palace, which was like 13 times bigger than the temple, and took far more years to complete. And even with the 700 wives that he married, which is another story, but with all of those wives, he built all of them their own house and their own temple to all their own gods. And then he starts building these cities and gardens and irrigation systems. And he's like, well, that wasn't it either. So then in verse 7, he's like, yeah, I had all these workers, all these slaves, people who I bought or people born in my house. I mean, I didn't have to think about what I was eating. I never had to think about cooking. I never had to think about dishes. I didn't even have to think about what I would wear tomorrow because it was all done for me. It was all done for me. And in verse 8, he says, I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings of provinces. I think it's 2 Chronicles chapter 9 where it says, that silver, like Solomon had so much money, that silver was as common as stone in his kingdom. I mean, that's what, I'm sitting there at my parents' house, and they live on a lake, and I look at these houses. And I mean, they're just huge houses. And I turn to Michelle, and I'm like, yeah, this was probably just a fraction of Solomon's possessions. And people here in Houston spend their whole life just trying to get one of these houses, and he had all of it and more, as far as the eye could see. And it said, I tried music. I got singers, both men and women. I'm an album collector, and so I love collecting all of these vinyls and listening to music. I love that all the time. I mean, this guy was like, buy the collection, man. I'm going to buy the band, and they're going to come sing in my palace. I mean, I could own everything. They said, I have all these concubines. Maybe I'll find it in sexual satisfaction. Or maybe in verse 9, he says, I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. He had all the power, all of his work, everything. He outdid everyone. I mean, he's basically building a resume here going, I've tried it all. I've tried it all. And I think what's interesting about this list here from verse 2 to 9 is it's almost like he's trying to build his own Garden of Eden. Because we see here, it says, he built for himself every kind of fruit tree. Now, that specific language is used 3 times in Genesis 1 and 2. And remember, with his research question, he's like, I'm trying to figure out this maddening problem that God gave the sons of Adam. So he very much, when we read Ecclesiastes, we need to think a lot about the first couple chapters of Genesis. Because what he's trying to do is he's saying, when sin entered the world in Genesis 3, it was fallen, it was cursed, it was crooked. Life became vanity. But yet in Genesis 1 and 2, God had this perfect design. And so I'm trying to reconcile these two things. And so what does he do? He tries to recreate Eden. He's trying to get back to paradise and even builds this self-sustaining garden that would outlast him. And we'll see later on in chapter 2, who's he leaving it to? What we see in these 11 verses is that joy doesn't come by addition, trying new things, adding new things. I mean, in verse 10, he was like, whatever my eyes desired, I didn't keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. My heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was the reward for my toil. I mean, there is no forbidden fruit in this garden. And we'll see later in verse 23, he worked without resting. So it's funny because it's like he's trying to recreate the Garden of Eden, and he thought by doing so, well, I'll just make everything is accessible. There's no limits here. And Eden, where there were limits, it was actually better. And so he's probably coming to this kind of crisis where he's like, well, pleasure then is kind of like a sedative, where it makes you feel good, it numbs you, it might create momentary ease of pain or a momentary high, but it doesn't actually fix anything. It doesn't actually heal the problem there. It just makes us not feel it for some time, and then it wears off, and then we need another shot. I mean, that's the irony of pleasure, is that it promises happiness, but it doesn't actually lead to sustaining, lasting, true joy. Because when we take a good thing and make it an ultimate thing or a God thing, it then just becomes an empty thing. It becomes an empty thing. So he says, all right, well, feeling is not going to make me satisfied. Feeling is not going to give me joy. Well, maybe I'll turn to knowledge. Tried hedonism. Let's try the contemplative life. Let me just try to learn and figure out how the world works. Maybe if I know more, then I'll find the good life. And so in verse 12 to 17, he turns to wisdom and folly. And I love the way that he's writing in verse 12. So if we see this as the whole of the book, and you look at the end of chapter 12, we think that this is him writing to his son, kind of as instruction. So he says, so I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. It's almost like he's trying to refute the son sitting there going, yeah, but Dad, you didn't try this. And he's like, no, I tried it all. I'm going to consider wisdom, which morality, goodness. I'm going to try madness and folly, immorality, crazy, just unhinged living. Again, trying to find that Eden, and the one tree that was off limits in Eden was the knowledge of good and evil. And God's like, that's for me to know. When you eat of that tree, you're trying to be God. And he says, I'm going to try it all. And what he concludes in verse 13 and 14 is like, yeah, wisdom is better than foolishness, right? The wise man can see where he's going, can see what he's doing, and the fool walks in darkness. And the way that he uses the eyes here is darkness is actually inside of him because he has no eyes. So he's like, yes, it's better to have eyes in a fallen world than walk in darkness. That makes sense. But then he goes on at the end of verse 14 all the way through verse 16, and he's like, yeah, but even that wisdom is relatively better. It doesn't ultimately last. Because he says, what happened to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been so very wise? The wise, just as the fool, there's no enduring remembrance. How the wise dies just like the fool. So he's like, whether you're moral or immoral, everyone's mortal. Everyone will die. Every single person has a date with death. Whether you're the smartest, you have 18 PhDs and you can speak every language on the globe, or you don't even know your right foot from your left, everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to die. He says, no matter how hard or how smart you are, you can't outsmart death. It's going to catch you. And so what he says here is, just the reality of death just shows me that joy is not found in what we know. So as he's looking under heaven, he's like, well, let me try what I feel. And he's like, nope, joy's not found there. Now he's like, let me try what I know. He says, it's not found there. So being a smart or wise or good person, yes, it's better than being a fool, but also it's that in and of itself is not going to lead to true, lasting, satisfying joy. Because death is the great equalizer, and when we die, what good is your wisdom? What good is your knowledge? What good is what you've learned? I know in today's culture, we hear it all the time. I heard it on Instagram this last week. Knowledge is power, right? Education is the future. And I'd say, yes, it's helpful, but it's also limited in some ways. It's incomplete because we are finite people. We are limited in what we know, limited in all that we can learn. And honestly, some of the smartest people are some of the most unhappy people because they're pondering the big questions of life. And unless they have a framework of something beyond this life, they're just like, it's hopeless. It's hopeless. Education does not mean that we will be wise. And even if we do attain wisdom or grow in wisdom, wisdom in and of itself won't lead to a satisfying life. I mean, we see this, right? If you think about some of the most immoral places, even in our nation, even in our city, you might think, well, maybe the inner city or maybe this or that. A lot of time, I mean, some of the most egregious acts of immorality have happened on college campuses, right? I mean, I saw that when I was at Baylor 15 years ago. I mean, my roommates were just like, hey, let's go get hammered. Let's try these drugs. Let's go graffiti this thing. Let's smash this TV. I mean, these are people who are now running companies, which is just wild. But I mean, they're there and they're learning and nothing's off limits and it's wild. It's wild what goes on there. And you're like, shouldn't you guys be some of the smartest people in the city? You're doing some of the dumbest things. So you think, well, education doesn't really fix that. I mean, it helps, but it's like, what is education's goal? Is it to know God? Or is it to just better ourselves and help ourselves down the road? And I think something, and we'll see this next week a lot at the beginning of Ecclesiastes 3, is that there's this illusion that knowledge gives us control. Right? We think, well, if I just knew this, then I could have stopped that. I mean, I've even looked back on mistakes in my life and I said, if I knew what I know now, I could have prevented these catastrophes. I could have prevented these broken relationships. I could have prevented that hurt. I could have prevented that disaster. As if I have control over certain things. Knowledge is not a lever to control things, and Solomon is proof of that. I mean, he had a PhD in life. And what was his conclusion in verse 17? So I hated life. He hated it. So he goes, all right, hedonism doesn't work. The contemplative life doesn't work. Any of you philosophy people out there, well, let's try the active life. Let's try to do things. So he turns to work. Now, not quite in the way that we saw last week at the beginning of chapter 1, but here he more turns to success. Maybe I'll accomplish something. But what I love is he doesn't even say, I turned to toil. He just goes straight from, I hated life to, and I hated work too. I hated my toil. I hated the rat race. Why? He gives two reasons. In verse 18 to 21, he's like, because somebody else is going to profit from what you do. The more and more and more you amass, the more you are going to leave to someone else. And Solomon's like, and who knows, is he going to be wise or is he going to be a fool? And if this was Solomon writing it, we know his son, Rehoboam, was not a wise king. All this gold and silver that Solomon amassed, he lost as he was plundered. This great kingdom that David built and handed over to Solomon, and Solomon just exponentially grew. Rehoboam lost 10/12 of the kingdom. And he's like, well, who knows? All this work, and I'm leaving it to some schmuck? And you're like, yeah. You read on in 2 Chronicles, and that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. And then he's like, in verse 22, he's like, the work itself is toil. It's frustrating. It's troublesome. It's drudgery. It's mentally exhausting. The more you climb up the corporate ladder, the more problems and more headaches and more emails that you're going to have to deal with. And so joy is not found in what we feel. It's not found in what we know. And here we see joy is not found in what we do. It's not found in what we do. I mean, if you read back through Ecclesiastes 2, you'll see one really tall letter standing alone, I. I tried this, I tried that, I turned to this, I considered this, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did that. This week when I was sitting at a coffee shop, I literally wrote down all the I statements of Solomon and filled an entire page. Filled an entire page. And what does he say it leads to here? Exhaustion, striving of heart, verse 22. Verse 23, all of his days are full of sorrow, sadness. His work is a vexation. It just creates more anxiety. And even in the night, when he's exhausted and sorrowful and just so fed up with everything, his heart can't even rest. Or what the Hebrew says is, his heart can't lie down. He can't stop working. And even if he tries to turn it off, he can't. I think the image that Tim Keller used was, all we do in work is like trying to plow water. Which, if you think of plowing, you think of water. As soon as you push the water, more water just comes in and fills right behind. One pastor said that success is not an end zone. It's more like a treadmill. And the reward to success is just more work. I mean, I don't know, I don't like running. I don't know what people are running from all the time. And it's hot. And so people are like, well, I'm going to put a treadmill in my house and at least run in the AC. But if you've ever run on a treadmill before, you know why they call it the dreadmill, right? Because you just turn up the speed and guess what your reward is? You have to run harder. And that's what he's saying success is like here. You just have to run harder, run faster, and the rat race just gets more intense and you get sucked into it. Now, I know a lot of us are probably not pursuing work in that way, but we look at kind of our call, especially as parents, to love our kids and equip them. And so we just say, well, I want to give my kids a good life. And that's a good and godly thing and a noble thing to, you don't want to leave debt for your kids. You want to set them up. You want to make it where maybe they can, if they want to go get a good education, they can do so in a way that doesn't put them in the hole for 10, 20 years. You want them to have all the skills. You want them to love the Lord. But if we're just thinking materially, and we then go, okay, then I need to work hard so that then they can enjoy life. What this workaholism does is that it promises us happiness, but it keeps on demanding. And what we see in the conclusion here at the end of verse 22 and 23, when he thinks about success, is he's like, actually, it cheats you out of rest. You're working so hard for this retirement, but you don't even get to rest along the way. And it cheats you out of time with your family. I mean, workaholics destroy families. I mean, we all know people like that if we haven't been that ourselves. I mean, it's weird. We're spending all this time for our kids only to neglect them because I got to finish this project. I got to meet this deadline. And if you look statistically at it, even if you leave your kids a great inheritance, in 60% of the cases, the inheritance that you leave for your kids is gone by the end of the second generation. It doesn't even last. You spent your whole life racking something up that they spent like that. And that's where I'm like, I think this is really key. I'll move on, but when we think of the American dream or we think of wanting a successful life, the American dream is kind of like a downwards escalator that everyone's trying to run up. Well, we don't want to stop because then we'll just be back where we started. And we waste our lives running up this downward escalator only to find ourselves going nowhere. It's too much strain and too little gain. And Solomon is the test case of this. He's like, I tried it all. So at this point, you're like, okay, Michael, you just really let us have it for a good half an hour. If Solomon can't find the good life, if he can't find joy, who in the world can? And this is where these last three verses, I know it's just one paragraph, but this is where, he's living in this vapor and this mist of life, and this is where the sun just comes bursting through. There is a word that shows up in these last three verses that is virtually nowhere to be found in the book so far. It's found one other place, but it's actually the cause of the problem. But here we see he turns to God. This is where God is introduced as actually like a solution here. Look at what he says. He says, there's nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Why? Well, this also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases God, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. It's a great promise. He says, but to the sinner, the person who runs after all these things, like I just showed you how empty it is, he's given the business of gathering and collecting only to give back to the person who pleases God. Or to use Jesus' words, he says, the meek shall inherit the earth, and it might be on the back of the unrighteous. And he's like, isn't that vanity? Do you see what you're doing? Now, I want to just be clear. These last three verses are not carpe diem passages, right? And if you're not familiar with carpe diem, it's seize the day. And it's saying, well, let's eat and drink and be merry because tomorrow we die. So just enjoy what you can because it's all going down the toilet anyways. I don't think that's what he's saying. The way I think, I shared a little bit of this in an email this week, but the way that one pastor describes how Solomon views life in Ecclesiastes is kind of like a 3-story house, right? So on the ground floor, that's just life as we see it. You look around, it's kind of when he uses the phrase under the sun or under heaven, it's without consideration of anything beyond it. He looks around, and here he explores all the rooms, and he just says it's vanity. It's meaningless. It's a vapor. But then 7 times throughout Ecclesiastes, he goes up to the 2nd floor where he's like, okay, those things won't ultimately satisfy us, but we can actually enjoy them as good gifts from God to enjoy and to have a great, taste great food. Laugh with your family. These are gifts from God. Enjoy your work. You can enjoy your work. And then, and we'll see this more next week, but every now and then he goes up to the 3rd floor, where the 3rd floor kind of concludes, where the book concludes, where he's like, fear God, for he will bring everything into judgment. So you see this, and that's why I say it's not carpe diem, because it's not just, find these things to kind of just enjoy and kind of cope with life's vanity, because you're like, okay, fine, I can enjoy these things, but there's still something messed up. Things need to be made right. And that's what the 3rd floor does, and it actually makes more sense of the 1st and 2nd floor. But back to Ecclesiastes 2. What he says here in verse 24 to 26 is that every single thing that he found empty, everything that made him hate life and hate work and hate everything, now he can enjoy. Why? Because God's the giver. And I think what's interesting about this is it's like his paradigm shifts. He's no longer seeking. He's no longer striving. He's no longer grasping for stuff. He's receiving. He's receiving. And when life isn't about what we get or what we gain, but what God gives, it changes everything. The paradigm shift is so helpful. So if you want to know where can joy be found, well, it's not under heaven. It's not in what we feel, what we know, what we do, but joy is only found in the hands of God. Joy can only be found in the hands of God. The problem here in his quest isn't these things, because we see, and we'll see throughout the rest of Ecclesiastes, a lot of these things that he said in and of themselves were vanity. He's like, no, I've actually grown to enjoy these things as gifts from God. So the problem isn't the things in and of themselves, but it's the shift of paradigm of, I'm going to take these things, I'm going to search for these things, I'm going to find these things, I'm going to, by my own hands, grab these things and take hold of them. Where then what he shifts in verse 24 to 26 is he's like, no, I'm actually receiving them as a gift from God. When it's I, it's empty. But then when you receive this as a good gift, it's full of gratitude and joy. I mean, I see this all the time with when kids start stealing back and forth, no one's happy. And I always say, well, if you guys just said, hey, can I give this to you and can I give this to you? Even if the same goods are exchanged, just the vibe in the room is different. And they're not angry at each other. They're not competing with each other. They're trying to encourage each other and give to one another. And then it takes these things from leaving you with this unsatisfied greed to this grateful joy. I mean, we even see this in the New Testament. Some of these things, if you think of pleasure, for instance. pleasure in and of itself, even throwing a party, isn't a bad thing. It could be a bad thing. It could also be a good thing. I mean, you think of the story Jesus tells in Luke 15, the prodigal son, right? Think about how parties are used in that story. Partying in and of itself is a negative thing. That's what actually leads him to despair and leads him to return home. That's where he found at the bottom of it all emptiness. But then when he returns home, what does the dad do? He throws a party. It's an expression of joy. It's a great celebration. And he gets to start enjoying all of these gifts. And so that's what we're seeing here in these last 3 verses is stop trying to find joy in these things. We're not going to enjoy them more. And when we do that, when we stop trying to find enjoyment in these things, I would argue you even enjoy them more. And here's what I mean. When things don't need to satisfy us, like I said earlier, when I was in college, I was just like, man, if I just had that wife, then I'd be happy. That puts a lot of pressure on that poor girl, right? Because then she has to satisfy my deepest longings of my heart. And that just sounds like a very anxious, terrible, stressful marriage. But when I go, no, I am satisfied in Christ, now I can look at my wife and go, man, what a great gift. I do not deserve this. This is amazing. This is such a gift from the Lord that I can actually enjoy. It's just the perspective shift. It's not, well, just turn away everything and just deny all of these good things that the Lord's trying to give to you, but see them for what they are. They're gifts. They're not gods. Now, I know that this is easier said than done, right? We read the passage that we read today and we go, okay, well, I want verse 24 to 26. But so many times I feel like what we do is we just keep drifting back functionally. We drift back to Solomon's quest. We don't learn from his experience, so we got to learn from our own. And when we get to the one who pleases God, he's given him wisdom and knowledge and joy. And you're like, okay, Michael, I want to please God. And then you read scripture, and you're like, okay, nobody pleases God. Jesus was the only person who pleased God. And so you're like, well, the preacher here, I mean, he had to learn the hard way. Life is hard. Life is not satisfying in and of itself. And even when you read the story of Jesus, he had a harder life than any of us. He experienced vanity in the worst way possible, but he did it to purchase us something that none of these things in our text could actually do. He purchased our souls and gave us something far greater than anything we could attain from God. And so when you think all these things are gifts from the hand of God, it's like, yeah, but the greatest gift was Christ. Because apart from him, none of these things are gifts. And what Christ did in coming and dying for our sins, rising from the dead, is he actually freed us and delivered us and forgave us from all of our grasping, all of our striving, all of our perfectly curated Garden of Eden, where we try to find meaning, we try to be the king of our own kingdom, which is such an offense to God. And Jesus says, no, I'm coming to live and die, not only to forgive you from that, but actually invite you into the only kingdom that will last. That's what he did. That's what he accomplished. And then when we're satisfied in him and when we go, yeah, I get to be a part of that, I get to share in the glory and the riches of heaven, like that's incredible. Then I can approach life as a gift because it doesn't need to satisfy me. It doesn't need to give me joy, and then I can start to find joy in all these things. And so if you're just searching for joy and you're running into every room on that first floor like Solomon was, trying to find meaning, trying to find purpose, trying to find joy, trying to find the good life, you're not going to find it. It can only be found in Christ. And when we turn from trying to find the good life on our own and just turn to him, and he's like, I am the life. I am the definition and the source of all goodness. And anyone who comes to me, I'm going to love and welcome and remove burdens and just treat you like my brother. I'm going to share everything with you. To turn, come to Christ, hear his offer. I think when we walk away from this, we need to see, yes, even though everything in this life is absurd, which it is, they also can be gifts. And them being absurd doesn't make them any less gifts, and them being gifts doesn't make them any less absurd. But what we're trying to see here in this passage is don't pursue them. Pursue Christ. Like, be pleased in him, enjoy him. Because more things won't satisfy us. Only God will satisfy us, and he does. And then we see in James, it says, every good gift comes down from above, from the Father of lights. He loves to give good gifts, just like any parent does. Loves to give good gifts to his children. So don't grasp and strive after all these things, but then when we get these things, we can receive them with gratitude from God. And then we're not wasting our life trying to be satisfied by something that wasn't meant to satisfy us, because our heart is in Christ. And that's what it means when the psalmist says, he is my portion, he is my strength, he is my everything. Whom have I in heaven but you?